Good evening, PTA members. My name is Tina Hartman, and I'm the chairman of the National PTA Bylaws and Policy Committee, and also a member of the National PTA Board of Directors. Thank you for joining the National PTA Bylaws and Policy Committee webinar on an overview of the proposed bylaws revision. This is the first of 3 webinars that the Bylaws Committee will be holding. This is a live webinar, and all members of the Bylaws Committee will be available to answer your questions at the end of the webinar. This webinar will be recorded so that you can refer back to it at a later date if needed or to share with others. The recorded webinar will be available at pta.org/bylaws 24 to 48 hours after the webinar has ended. Please feel free to type your questions in the comment box at the right of your screen during the webinar, and we will answer questions at the end. If you have procedure, please email those questions to bylawsrevision@pta.org. First, I would like to refer you to the September 2015 newsletter distributed by the National PTA Bylaws and Policy Committee. The full newsletter can be found on the National PTA website, pta.org/bylaws. The newsletter outlined the actions taken at the 2015 National PTA Convention and what the motion to refer back to committee means. In short, the motion was to refer the proposed National PTA Bylaws revision back to the Bylaws and Policy Committee to report back at the 2016 National PTA Convention in Orlando, Florida. This means at the 2016 National PTA Convention, the motion to approve the proposed National PTA Bylaws revision remains on the floor, and debate on the proposed bylaws revision will resume where it left off at Article 7 since it was not defeated or adopted. Now I would like to let you know what the National PTA Bylaws and Policy Committee has been working on over the past few months. In August, we met for the first time as a committee at the National Governance Retreat, NGR. At NGR, we met with the chair of the previous committee to gain insight into the proposed National PTA Bylaws revision process. We then met with the attorney who provided some best practices to the previous National PTA Bylaws and Policy Committee. The Bylaws and Policy Committee identified 5 hot-button issues that we felt were important to our delegates. These issues were identified using previously proposed or submitted amendments, Board of Directors insight, and discussions with state leaders. The committee distributed its first electronic newsletter in September of 2015 to help all PTA members understand what happened at the 2015 National PTA Convention and what will happen at the 2016 National PTA Convention. The committee has been meeting bi-weekly via conference calls since NGR to discuss potential amendments to the proposed National PTA Bylaws revision. The committee assigned each state congress to a National PTA Bylaws committee member so that every state would have a personal contact on the committee to help answer any questions they might have regarding the National PTA Bylaws revision process. A survey was distributed to approximately 225,000 PTA members in October of 2015 to help guide the committee in proposing amendments to the proposed National PTA Bylaws revision. We will review the results of the survey as we progress through the webinar series. Finally, the committee met in person in early December to put its amendments into formal language and draft rationale to report to the membership at the 2016 National PTA Convention. To give you an overview of the surveys submitted, there were 1,823 surveys started, and of those, 593 surveys were completed. Any questions answered on the dropout surveys are still part of the results and percentages. We also recognize that there were individuals who responded to the survey multiple times, so we took this into consideration. Let's move on to what happens from here. The committee has put its amendments into draft form, which will be made available to you throughout this webinar and each subsequent webinar in the series. It's important to note that the 45 days notice of amendments required in the current bylaws found in Article 26, subsection B, does not apply in our given situation, as the motion to approve the proposed National PTA Bylaws revision is still an open motion on the floor of the 2016 National PTA Convention. What this means is that the committee amendments could potentially change as we move through this webinar series and gather additional input from our membership. The Bylaws and Policy Committee has planned several opportunities to share information about the National PTA proposed bylaws revision and to address your questions, both in advance of the National PTA Convention in Orlando and on site. We are sharing information with you starting in January this year and want to make sure that there is dialogue between now and National PTA Convention. The National PTA Bylaws and Policy Committee will be presenting 3 webinars, including this one. This webinar consists of an overview of the National PTA Bylaws revision process and a review of Article 7. On February 11th, we will review Articles 8 through 11. And on February 25th, we will review the remaining articles, keeping in mind that not all articles will have committee-proposed amendments. In March, at the Legislative Conference, the Bylaws and Policy Committee will be presenting its amendments to the state presidents and presidents-elect. So what is the convention process going to be? A writing lab will be made available on Thursday morning, June 30th, at the 2016 National PTA Convention to assist delegates in answering questions or drafting amendments. If you plan to write and/or submit an amendment, please be sure that you include a process for ensuring that your amendment is complete and does not contain any what-ifs or unanswered questions. Please note that there will not be a bylaws briefing at the 2016 National Convention, so your participation in the webinar series or your outreach to us, if you have any questions or concerns in advance of arriving in Orlando, Florida for National PTA Convention, is extremely valuable to the committee. What is a conforming amendment? You will see some conforming amendments within the committee's National PTA Bylaws revision amendments. In some instances, if an amendment is adopted, it will ultimately change other areas of the bylaws, and conforming amendment will permit the committee to make those changes without having to adopt several additional amendments. The deadline for pre-filed amendments at the 2016 National PTA Convention will be Thursday, June 30th at 1 p.m. You will need to submit all amendments by this time. We will be unable to accept them prior to convention. If you submitted an amendment at the 2015 National PTA Convention that was not heard on the convention floor, that amendment is no longer part of the process. However, the same or similar motion could be made at the 2016 National PTA Convention. The bylaws discussion will begin on Thursday, June 30th at 3 p.m. general meeting. The proposed bylaws revision discussion will begin with Article 7 because Articles 1 through 6 were reviewed and amended by the 2015 National PTA Convention delegates. In the proposed bylaws revision document, you will see some wording reflected in red. These are amendments that were approved by the 2015 National PTA Convention delegates and will remain as adopted. After the last article is debated, delegates will be given an opportunity to make amendments to the proposed bylaws revision document as a whole. This is where any additional amendments to Articles 1 through 6 could be made. National PTA Bylaws and Policy Committee member Latha Krishnaiyer will present information related to Article 7 of the proposed National PTA Bylaws revision.
Thank you, Tina. The National PTA Bylaws and Policy Committee solicited and used information from various sources throughout its amendment process. Based on information gathered and subsequent discussions, the committee is in agreement that no additional changes need to be proposed to Article 7 at this time. There were 2 questions referencing Article 7 on the survey relating to state presidents serving in a national PTA officer capacity, and no two national PTA officers being from the same state. The chart on this slide demonstrates a scenario that could occur if we were to prohibit any two officers from the same state serving as a national PTA officer. If this scenario were to take place, we would have no feasible process in place to address what would be considered an incomplete election within the time constraints of the National PTA annual meeting. This scenario could happen if two or more individuals from the same state were seeking election as different national PTA officers, and one of the positions was uncontested. The uncontested position is automatically declared as elected, which would leave the other individuals from that state declared as disqualified. The committee did not feel that this would allow for an open and fair election process. The other question on the survey addressed is one of the state presidents serving in a national PTA officer capacity while still serving as state president. Nearly 48% of respondents felt that a state president should not serve as an officer of the national PTA while also serving as a state president, and 37% felt that a state president should be eligible to serve if remaining in their term as state president. The proposed National PTA Bylaws revision, as it currently reads, does not provide a specific time frame of eligibility for a state president to run for a national PTA officer position, which means a current state president is eligible to seek election at any time, provided they meet all of the qualifications to serve as a national PTA officer. The committee is supporting the wording of the proposed bylaws revision requiring a state president to resign immediately from their state presidency upon election as a national PTA officer. Thank you for joining us, and I would now like to hand this back to our chair, Tina Hartman.
This concludes our presentation of this webinar, and we would like to take our remaining time together to address any questions that you may have.
Due to the amount of registrants on this webinar, we will only be answering questions that are submitted through the question box. Your question box is located on the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen. We will try to answer as many questions as we can with the time remaining. If we are unable to answer your question in tonight's webinar, please feel free to submit your questions to the email that's listed on your screen, bylawsrevision@pta.org, and we will respond to your questions in the coming days. Our first question is from Celia, and she would like to know if we could repeat the deadlines for submitting amendments. Could you please answer that question for her, Tina?
Yes, to submit an amendment, it needs to be submitted by Thursday, June 30th. The deadline time is 1 p.m. in the afternoon.
And there's another question from Jean, and they would like to know, when we gave the example of two people from the same state, when you spoke of that, there not being two people from the same state able to run, was that an actual listing of applicants for the position or just an example? Latha, would you be able to answer that question?
Yes, it was just an example.
Justine would like to know if we could clarify that at the National PTA Convention, we will only be looking at Articles 7 through 11. Could you answer that for us, Tina?
Initially, we will begin with Article 7, and we will go through every article in the bylaws revision. Not all articles are going to have a committee-proposed amendment. However, delegates are able to write amendments to other articles.
There's a question from Brian. Does the lack of changes to the officers mean that there will be no proposal to combine the resolutions and legislative committee? This question can be for Latha or it could be for Sandy.
Sandy, you want to take that?
Actually, we'll be discussing that in our third webinar when we get to the committee's article of the National PTA Bylaws. So I'm hoping that this respondent will be on that webinar so that they can see the proposal that our committee will be bringing forward.
We have a question from Debbie. She'd like to know, will we be able to submit amendments at the general meetings, or if they were not pre-filed? So once again, will we be able to submit amendments at the general meetings if they were not pre-filed? Tina, could you answer that question?
Can we note that question and have her email us or something? That's a question I'd just like to confirm with Raleigh before I answer it.
Absolutely. Debbie, we'll be responding to you after we consult our parliamentarian. Tina, we have another question for you. Can you please explain how a motion to refer to committee remains open when a convention adjourns the year before?
Unfortunately, that's probably a Raleigh question because we got our direction from the parliamentarian. Because the motion was not defeated or adopted, it still remains open. So I think we need to follow up with our parliamentarian for you. If you can email that question to us and we can get back with you, I'd really appreciate it.
Great, and I also see that there are some questions about some other registrants that would like to know the answers to these questions. So in reference to those three parliamentarian questions, we will submit answers to the full list of attendees on this webinar, so everyone will get the answer after consulting the parliamentarian. And at this time, we don't see any other questions. We'll give it a few more minutes if anyone has any other ones. Seeing that there are no other questions. Oh, there's another question. And that is another question for our parliamentarian on amendments to amendments. So we will also be sending that over an email as well. So Dawn would like to know if members will receive a copy of all prepared amendments by the committee before coming to convention. Tina, would you like to respond to that?
Well, we haven't really discussed that yet. Yes, I would say yes, we will have them posted on pta.org/bylaws because the amendments can change. We could be changing them up until the day of convention. So I encourage you, we can put them out there definitely so that you'll be able to see them, but please check back often so that you're aware of any changes that are made.
That's great. Thank you, Tina. With no other questions in the box, we want to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us on this webinar. Again, the recording of this webinar will be available on pta.org/bylaws in 24 to 48 hours. If you have additional questions after the webinar closes, or in a few days if you think of a few other additional questions, please feel free to email them to the Bylaws and Policy Committee at bylawsrevision@pta.org. Again, the email is on your screen. And once again, we thank you for everyone attending tonight's webinar, and we look forward to you in our second webinar. Have a good night.